There was a version of me that stood in a hallway and felt nothing. Not yet. I just looked at the space where their shoes used to be, and I thought, that is a strange thing to notice. The shoes. Not the absence of a person. The absence of the shoes. It is funny how we measure a life by the things that are missing. I thought the silence was temporary. I thought if I stayed very still, if I just waited long enough, the world would correct itself. Like a compass finding north. Like a held breath finally releasing. But the silence didn't leave. It moved in. It unpacked itself into the kitchen and the bedroom and the quiet corners of my head where I used to keep my plans. It made itself at home in the spaces I had been saving for something else. Well, if you have ever stood in a room that used to mean something and felt like a ghost in your own life, you know what I am talking about? That feeling that you are not just losing a person. You are losing the version of yourself that they were supposed to protect. That is what we are here for today. Not the romanticized version of this. Not the film version where the crying is beautiful and the revelation arrives on cue. The real version. The mechanical, unglamorous, 3 a.m. version of what betrayal actually does to a person, and what it is quietly building inside you while you are still too broken to see it. Because what nobody tells you, what I wish someone had told me, is that the strength you are looking for right now is not waiting for you in an apology that is never coming. It is waiting in the wreckage. Let me tell you about Sarah. 29 years old, primary school teacher. The kind of person who remembered birthdays 2 weeks early and stayed late without being asked. Who genuinely believed, with her whole body, not just her mind, that if you loved someone completely and consistently enough, that was enough. She gave 3 years to someone she was certain about. 3 years of ordinary Tuesdays, of learning each other's rhythms, of building something in the quiet spaces between big moments. The kind of relationship that doesn't make for a dramatic story because it felt so solid, so decided. And then one day, not dramatically, not with a confession or a confrontation, or even a real explanation, they were simply gone. Not gone the way people leave in films. Gone the way water slowly drains from a bathtub you forgot you were sitting in. The worst part, Sarah told me, wasn't the leaving. The worst part was what she did after. For 6 months, she tried to become someone they would have stayed for. She changed her hair. She changed her schedule. She got quieter in the places she used to be loud. She shrank herself into the exact shape of the absence, as if she could fill the space they left by disappearing into it. Maybe you recognize that. Maybe you know exactly what it feels like to stand in front of a mirror and run the inventory. Too much of this, not enough of that, too loud, too needy, too... Here is what nobody says out loud in those first weeks. The question you are really asking, underneath all the self-examination, underneath the replaying of every conversation, underneath the checking their profile at 2 a.m, the real question is not what did I do wrong? The real question is, am I the kind of person who gets left? That question, that specific, quiet, devastating question, that is the one that does the most damage. Not the betrayal itself. The story you build around it. The identity you start constructing from the wreckage, where you are not the person who was hurt, but the person who deserved to be. And I need to tell you something about that story, because it is a lie. And it is a lie that makes complete psychological sense, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. There is a pattern that forms in the aftermath of betrayal that almost nobody names directly. I call it the worth displacement loop. Here is how it works. Someone leaves, or cheats, or chooses someone else, or simply stops showing up in the ways that mattered. And because the human mind cannot tolerate randomness, because we are meaning-making creatures at our core, we immediately begin constructing a cause. And the cause we construct is almost always ourselves. Because if the problem is them, we are helpless. We cannot reach back into the past and change their choices. We cannot fix what lives inside another person. But if the problem is us, if we can find the flaw, the gap, the specific thing we did or failed to do or should have been, then there is something to work on. There is an action. There is a path forward. The worth displacement loop is not weakness. It is the mind trying to survive powerlessness by converting it into agency. The tragedy is that the agency is false, and the price of maintaining it is your own sense of worth. This is exactly what Sarah was doing for those 6 months. She wasn't healing. She was auditing, running herself against an invisible standard set by someone who had already left the building. The reason this matters, the reason I am naming the mechanism specifically, is that you cannot break out of this loop by trying harder to improve yourself. You break out of it the moment you understand that the loop was never about improvement. It was about control, and what happened to you was never yours to control. I want to slow down here, because this is the part I need you to actually hear. You could have been perfect. You could have been everything. Quieter when they needed quiet, louder when they needed life. Softer, stronger, more patient, more exciting. And it still would not have been enough for someone who was not at peace with themselves. You were trying to fill a bucket that had a hole in the bottom. That is not a failure of the water. It is a failure of the bucket. Betrayal is not an accident. It is a series of choices. 1,000 small decisions to look away, to hide a truth, to prioritize a moment of selfish comfort over a lifetime of shared trust. And the reason it hurts the way it hurts is not only because of what they did. It is because of who you had to become to survive it. You had to become a detective in your own relationship. You had to become someone who questions their own eyes. You had to learn to live with a knot in your stomach that you called love, but which was actually just anxiety wearing love's clothes. I remember sitting in my car in a grocery store parking lot. It was raining. The kind of rain that makes everything look gray and slightly unreal. I had a list. I couldn't move. I just sat there watching the wipers go back and forth. And I realized I was waiting. Waiting for a text. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for them to realize they had made a mistake and come back and make the story mean something different. And then a thought arrived that was so sharp it made me sit back in my seat. What if they never realize? What if they are perfectly fine with the choice they made? That is the hardest turn in the road. The moment you understand that the villain in your story does not think they are the villain, they have already rewritten the history of your relationship. They are the seeker, the free spirit, the person who finally followed their heart. In their version, they are the hero. And when I felt that, really felt it, in my body, not just as an idea, I felt an anger I didn't know I was capable of. But here is what I know about anger now that I didn't know then. Anger is not the opposite of healing. Anger is the part of you that loves you enough to be outraged at how you were treated. For a long time, I tried to suppress it, tried to be graceful, tried to be the bigger person. But grace without boundaries is just self-destruction with better posture. If you are half listening to this while doing something else right now, I need you to actually stop for this next part. because this is the piece that makes everything else make sense. Betrayal does not break you into a lesser version of yourself. It breaks you into an earlier version, a rawer version, the version that existed before you learned to perform okayness, before you learned to sand down the edges of your needs to fit inside someone else's comfort zone, before you quietly decided that being loved required making yourself easier to love. That rawness is not damage. That rawness is the original material, and you cannot build anything real, anything that actually holds the weight of a life, from a version of yourself that has been edited for someone else's consumption. The betrayal did not take something from you that you will spend years trying to recover. It returned something to you that you had slowly, quietly given away. Sarah understood this. Not immediately, not in month 1 or month 2. You can understand something in your mind long before your body believes it. What she told me is that the turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no revelation in the rain. It was a Tuesday morning. She was running late for work, half a cup of coffee, and she caught herself, mid-thought, constructing the apology. The apology she had been mentally rehearsing for 6 months. The one where she explained what she should have done differently. The one composed for a person who had never asked for it and would never receive it. And something in her just stopped. Not with anger, not with some sudden surge of power, with exhaustion. She was tired of apologizing to someone who wasn't in the room. She was tired of shrinking for a shape that no longer existed. And in that exhaustion, quiet, unremarkable, just a Tuesday, something shifted. That is not a small thing. That is actually everything. I want to be honest with you about something. There will be people watching this who think, but you don't know what they did. You don't know how bad it was. You don't know what it actually cost. You are right. I don't. And I am not standing here telling you the betrayal was necessary, or that you should be grateful for it, or that everything happens for a reason in some clean and packaged way. I am telling you something narrower and more specific than that. I am telling you that you were already strong. The betrayal didn't build your strength. It forced you to stop wasting it on them and start using it on yourself. For years, you used your strength to carry the weight of 2 people, to make excuses for behavior that deserved none, to hold something together while someone else was busy dismantling it from the inside. When you lost them, you didn't lose your strength. You got it back. It feels like weakness right now because you are exhausted. Carrying a dying relationship is the most tiring work a human being can do. You are not broken. You are burnt out. There is a difference. Before we go further, I want to name a concept because it reframes something important about where you are right now. Most people know the idea that the winners write the history books. They get to decide what the story means. They get to assign the heroes and the villains. In your relationship, for a long time, they were the winner. They controlled the narrative. They told you that you were too sensitive, or too demanding, or too much. And because you loved them, you let them. You let them write the history of your worth. But here is what changed. You are the one still standing. You are the one doing the work. You are the one who survived, which means you get to pick up the pen. You get to decide that this story is not about how you were betrayed. The story is about how you were brave enough to stay soft in a world that tried to make you hard. About how you found your worth in the one place they could never reach, inside yourself. The reason this matters right now, the reason I am naming it specifically here, is that the rebuilding does not begin when you stop thinking about them. It begins when you stop letting their version of you live rent-free in your head. I actually laughed when I understood this myself. Not because it was funny, because it was so obvious once I saw it that I couldn't believe how long I had been sitting inside it. I had been mourning a version of them that never actually existed. I was grieving a fictional character I had built from hope and projection, and the 3 best months of what turned out to be a much longer and more complicated story. The person who betrayed me was not the person I loved. The person I loved was a projection. The person who betrayed me was the reality. And once you see the reality, once you really see it, you cannot go back to the projection. It is like learning how a magic trick works. Once you know where the mirrors are, the awe is gone. You just see the mechanics, the hidden compartments, the sleight of hand. And that is the moment you find your worth. Not because someone handed it back to you, because you finally stopped outsourcing it. Your worth is not a trophy that can be won or taken. It is not something another person can grant you or revoke. It is the ground you stand on. For a long time, you let them tell you where the ground was. You let them move it whenever it suited them. No wonder you felt off balance. Now you are building your own ground. It is slow work, quiet work. It does not get a lot of attention, but it is the only work that matters. Quick check. Right now, in this moment, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of your energy this week has gone towards someone who is no longer in your life? Drop your number in the comments. I want to see the pattern. There is a moment in every story of betrayal where the victim becomes the survivor, and it never happens the way you think it will. It doesn't arrive with a grand gesture or a perfect conversation or a moment of cinematic clarity. It happens in a grocery store when you realize you are buying the food you like instead of the food they preferred. It happens when you notice you haven't checked their profile in 3 days. It happens when the silence in your house stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like space. Space to think. Space to hear your own voice again after years of it being drowned out. Space to finally ask the question you stopped asking a long time ago. Who am I when I am not trying to be enough for someone else? Sarah knows the answer now. The woman who spent 6 months shrinking for an absence now takes up exactly the space she requires. Not aggressively, not as a performance, just completely. She stopped apologizing in advance, stopped making herself easier to leave by making herself smaller, stopped measuring her needs against someone else's tolerance, and the relationships that came into her life after, not all romantic, some of them friendships, some of them the relationships she rebuilt with herself. They were different in quality, because she brought a different version of herself to them. One who had lived through the proof of her own worth. One who didn't need to be told. I almost wish I hadn't found this truth myself, because once you see it, once you really see it, you realize how much of your life you spent in a cage that didn't even have a lock. You were the one holding the door shut, because you were afraid of what was waiting outside. But now that I am out, the air is better here. The view is clearer, and I would not go back for anything. I have one question for you before we close, and I don't want you to answer it for me. I want you to answer it for yourself. Who would you be right now, today, this week, this version of your life, if you stopped trying to prove you were worth loving and simply accepted it as fact? The way you accept gravity, the way you accept the tide. What would you do with your Saturdays? What would you dream about? That person, that specific, unedited version of you. is who is waiting on the other side of this. If this video put language to something you have been carrying without being able to name it, save it. The next time you find yourself inside the loop, auditing yourself against a standard set by someone who left, come back to the part about what the betrayal actually revealed. That is the part worth returning to. There is someone in your life right now. You already know who is still in the quiet hurt, still making excuses, still composing the apology nobody asked for. Send them this, not with a message. Just send it. They will know why. This channel is not for people who want the comfortable version of love and loss. It is for people who want the real version. The ones who are brave enough to look at the wreckage and see a beginning. If that is you, subscribe. We go this deep every single week. Now, there is something this video opened that it cannot fully close, because the betrayal didn't just break your trust in them, it broke your trust in your own judgment. That is a deeper layer, a different wound, and it is exactly what the next video is about. It is right here waiting for you. You are not the person who was discarded. Oh, you are the person who was released. Released from the weight of loving someone who didn't know how to love you back. Released from the exhaustion of holding something together that was always coming apart. Released into a life where your worth is no longer up for debate. You are not someone who is still broken by what happened. You are someone who was broken open by it. And there is a difference. I keep coming back to one question that I cannot fully answer. Whether the version of yourself you are becoming, the one with the clearer eyes and the harder-won boundaries and the quieter certainty about what you will and will not accept, whether that person could have existed without this, without the loss, without the Tuesday morning in the hallway, without the shoes that weren't there. I don't know. Maybe you are closer to the answer than I am. Go to the comments and tell me. What is one thing you lost in that relationship that you are genuinely glad is gone? Name it. Leave it here, and then walk away from it. You are not the person you were when that door clicked shut. You are the person who is still standing, and that is more than enough.